Tom, Michael, thank you so much for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, pleasure, yeah.
So you established Hammond and Cox Casting about 6 years ago now, and you've built up really quite a successful profile in the industry. Can you tell me a bit about why you established the company and the types of work that you do?
Yes.
Go on.
All right.
You're good at this bit.
Thanks. So yes, we started in 2012, and we'd both been actors, have known one another since 2000, so 18 odd years, and were actors, lived together. Obviously, spent a lot of time together as actors, and then around the mid-2000s, sort of 2004-05, started each of us working in casting, sort of separately, and for different casting directors, freelancing around maybe. Tom spent some time working for Spotlight, and we both were very interested in the casting process, went quite far doing that as freelancers, and then got to a point in 2011, both turning about 30, and where we sort of decided that we should do something, and we wanted to perhaps set up a company, and spent a year planning that, and kind of trying to work out exactly the type of company we wanted to run, what the profile of the company would be, and working that up before we launched in 2012 together. Why don't you talk about the kind of work?
Yeah, and in terms of the sort of work we do, our work is predominantly on camera, so that's what we're interested in, that's where our strengths lie. We have become, it wasn't especially by design, we've become very prolific commercial casting directors, so that's become the bulk of our work. We do other things as well, but it tends to be around that client base, so it's more associated work that we'll do alongside the ads, so music video and short film as well, but even that tends to come through our production connections through ads, which is good. I mean, it's funny, we were saying this recently, lots of people often ask us if we'd like to do other things, as if that should be the end game. To be honest, the honest answer there is no, not really, because we really like what we do. We really love working in commercial. It suits us temperamentally. It works very well. It's an area that we enjoy, and it's sort of also, I mean, I think at our best we hope that we can present that kind of work in a more actor-friendly way than perhaps it's been done in the past. So we can make the experience of coming into a room for what's often quite a short, pressured environment. We can make that slightly more creative when we have time to, when the opportunity allows.
Yeah, so it's all quite quick turnaround work, things that happen generally within a couple of weeks.
All of which suits the idea of two people doing it rather than one, so we can accommodate more bulk of work, and we can work to very quick turnarounds, which is a useful thing to do in the industry. Yeah.
What is it that you love about casting?
About casting, gosh, I mean, I think that we can probably speak of the particular element of casting that we do a lot of, which is commercial work, and I think that in the short amount of time that you spend in a room with someone, there is an opportunity to, even within commercial scripts and the kind of work that we do, to really be creative, frankly. And I think that both of us enjoy more than anything trying to create an experience for actors that has a slightly more kind of thought through, unusual kind of experience to it for them, something that means that they feel like they've kind of creatively exercised themselves, and also to deliver something on camera which has a degree of kind of final product quality to it. So we always enjoy using kind of sound and cues and props and things like that, just to kind of create as a kind of fuller picture as we possibly can within the room, and to try and kind of give the actors an investment in the short moment that they're doing, I suppose. So actually, just that small amount of creativity that you get and meeting actors and going through that process with them is...
Yeah, I think, I mean, probably for both of us, certainly for me, it's short attention span as much as anything. Like, it's a short form medium. The experience of coming into a casting room happens very quickly over a short space of time. And there's a particular challenge to setting something up and working on it and developing ideas and developing sort of situations and scenes and moments within a short space of time. And that carries its own rewards with it, I think. It's sort of always the same, always different as well. There's something about the consistency of the process, doing the same thing 25 times, which is interesting to do with different people. So.
An awful lot of what we do, with a lot of commercial work, for example, commercial castings, it's less of obviously a sit-down read on camera, which is what you're going to do with a lot of drama projects. There's an awful lot of imagining things that are out in the space and seeing things and reacting to them, which is really challenging for actors to, you see a mountaintop over there and respond to it with awe. That's a hard thing to do in a grey room. And as best we can, we try to kind of foster an environment where people can use their imagination, or to kind of give them best access to things that are going to help them give the right kind of reaction.
I think by extension as well, that means that, for our clients, that they get more out of a casting director in those situations, because it's not just bringing someone in who's read a script, read some sides, and who will deliver that. Obviously, there's an element of that to it, sometimes more than others, but I mean, often we'll be setting up ideas or moments or character from scratch, and I think that means that there's more for us to do, and there's more challenge and more variety to all of that, which is exciting.
How does it differ, the casting for commercials compared to a short film or a music video?
Well, firstly, I would say that it happens very quickly, comparatively. So, a lot of our turnarounds are at best 48 hours. So we'll go out and we'll be usually casting either the next day or the day afterwards. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
Perhaps the amount of actors you'll see, we'll aim to see 20 to 25 actors per role for a commercial, which is perhaps a few more than you might see for a drama project. And the amount of time you spend in the room, ideally you're looking at 10 minutes per actor, perhaps for a commercial casting. And as I said, for a short film, largely you're going to be sat probably, or standing and doing a read with someone off the camera. But a lot of what we do is you have to imagine an awful lot, or that you're putting people into experiences or situations that are actually quite surreal, and helping them to kind of create a little picture, and and so much comes from their reaction, and trying to kind of get as much out of them as they can to tell a story, I suppose. But
I think fundamentally as well, with drama, you'd expect there to be a director in the room sooner rather than later.
That's true.
And in fact, for drama, our role becomes more servicing that experience for them rather than setting it up. So,
yes.
And that's sort of what I mean by you get more out of us really on a commercial process. So, it would be, by and large, the directors that we work with tend not to have time to come into the process until later on at point of recall. And even then, they may still choose to sit back and let us run the room a little bit more, so set moments and ideas up a little bit more so than they might otherwise. When you're walking someone into the room for a short film casting, really it's about setting up a first take and then passing them over to the director, or even just facilitating that conversation in the first instance. So there's less to do.
Yeah, it actually gives us quite a decent amount of creative freedom up until the point where you get to a recall. It's quite
I think it's more fun. It's more interesting,
totally.
to be honest.
Yeah, it is fun actually. Yeah.
It's funny, in commercials, I think a lot of people think, oh, it's so easy, you just turn up, and usually there's no lines, and, it's just imagining something that you're told to do in the room. But actually, sometimes it's doing smaller things and less that is harder.
Yes.
And it's really easy to get it wrong and to overplay it.
Absolutely.
And obviously when you're on camera, you don't need to overplay it, do you?
No.
Yeah, I think also, even beyond that, there's the size of the performance, and there's a tone of the performance as well, which I don't think you necessarily get from reading the script. So there are times when it's useful to share a script in advance. There are times when it definitely isn't, and there are times when you can read something for reference, but it doesn't really bear any relation to what we'll be asking an actor to do on camera in the room. So you have to kind of carry those quite open expectations into to what you're prepared to do and how you approach that casting as an actor.
Commercials are all sort of genre pieces, aren't they? As much as anything else.
This is a particular hobby horse of ours.
That you can often key into a tone, like Tom says, or a genre in which the commercial fits quite easily. And as an actor, if you are, if you have references at your fingertips, if you kind of you know what a particular type of genre, a horror genre, a comedy, sort of American comedy or something like that is, how that's going to play when applied to a script, then you're at a slight advantage at that point. You can key into something quite quickly, and that is important, because ultimately advertising references and riffs off of popular culture mostly, and what's kind of in the zeitgeist at the moment. So if there are particular shows, films, things like that are popular, you can imagine that 2 or 3 months down the line, commercials will start to be developed and produced that follow a similar sort of a tone, perhaps, or sort of.
That must be fascinating to watch, actually.
Oh yeah, it's interesting, and from our side, sometimes an actor will see a treatment that a director's written, talking about how their process and how they want to go about making and styling a commercial, or what references they're using, and it's interesting to watch how things get referenced on those treatments, the kind of actors and pieces that get referenced on there. And it's interesting that you talk about kind of size of performance as well, because I think broadly speaking, the two hardest things to get are the bigger and the smaller performances on camera. camera. So there's a lot that sits in the middle. So you could take 3 lines of dialogue and you could play it so many different ways. And a tiny film performance or a heightened comedy performance, those are the things that are the hardest to get, that actors don't necessarily have immediately to hand to reference. So, you know, if we can be helpful in terms of developing a kind of shorthand of communication, getting them to that point quickly, be it with example or sort of use of language, then that's the challenge, that's the fun, really. And it's different for everyone.
I think also, and this is something that we often say to actors, is that there is a broad misconception, I think, that commercial casting is to some degree out of your hands as a performer. And I think that there are elements of the process for which that's true, but there are also things that you can control, and a little bit of preparation, a little bit of thought into the character and the scripts as presented to you before you go into the room really can put you at an advantage. So it's very often the case that when we will give out scripts to people, that the people who come into the room and have just read it, thought about it a little bit, have some ideas about it, some ideas about the person they're playing within it, you're already at an advantage, and you're already starting off from a kind of solid baseline of where you want to be with it. Quite often, you know, as we were talking about earlier, one of the unique things about commercial casting is this short amount of time you have to cast with somebody, and you'll be looking at 2 or 3 takes with them. And that's really all you can afford to do within a short space of time. So if that first take is kind of wasted or burnt on just getting the shape of it right, or kind of re-explaining exactly what type of piece it is to an actor, that's wasted and that's gone, and you can't afford to take another one on that basis. Whereas if the first take already has a good solid footing and there's a general understanding of what we're getting at from that point, then you kind of can unlock some further direction and you can go into more detail with it on later takes. So it's really worth, when you're given a script as an actor, just sitting with it, looking at it, and really just analysing it a little bit as you would do a drama script. I mean, commercials still hinge around a point of change. Often that is an interaction with a product, ultimately. And looking at that, who's my character, what clues are there, where are they, what type of person are they? There's enough there. There will be bits and bobs there to pick out and
even
to give
key
you
words that you put in. Yeah.
And at worst, that's going to inform your understanding, which will have a beneficial impact on the experience that you have and what's left on camera, more importantly. Even if, because, you know, you might be given a script to read for reference, you might do all of that work in advance, you might make all of those choices, and then walk into the room, as I was doing about half an hour ago, and just have a chat on camera, where it's not about any kind of performance at all or delivering lines, but just about you as a person. And I still think if you've read all the material that's available, you can be clever and you can let that inform what you choose to say, the kind of the anecdote you choose to talk about, or the particular aspect of yourself that you choose to present. You know, it's all there and it all counts, I think.
Absolutely.
It must be quite obvious when someone hasn't prepped and they come in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Although some people are still really good at it.
Yeah.
And frankly, I mean, the other big thing for me, there's preparation and there's listening in the room as well. So I mean, it's knowing, coming in with ideas are brilliant, coming in with an understanding of the material is great, but also knowing that you might have to just throw all of that away and do something else, and to be able to do that and throw it out. So, you know, great to make choices, but really important to be able to just put them to one side too. So sometimes someone will come in and be on rails with a performance, for better or worse, and it might be a great performance that's a really good first take, and then it doesn't go anywhere, or it might be the wrong performance that they're then unable to tweak. So there's all sorts of ways in which it's about flexibility and listening, really.
And I suppose all of those things combine really towards something that's a good exercise for an actor. You know, actors, you could go up for a commercial, 2 commercials a week, whereas you're probably less likely to go up for as many drama projects as that. So there's a really good opportunity there to use them as an exercise to flexing your kind of acting muscle, you know, to analysing material, to getting ready in the morning, getting dressed, coming into town, going to a meeting, filling out a form, you know, going in front of camera and performing and listening to a director and working through something with them, and then coming away from that and leaving that to one side.
And by extension, it might be improvising, it might be working with other actors,
Absolutely.
might be working with a couple of them, or, you know, interacting with a director or someone offering direction. All of that counts, I think. It should be good fun.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a good way to kind of keep yourself sharp as much as anything else.
How closely do you work with directors and producers, and how much of a say do you have over, or a steer over, who gets the role?
So, very, closely, certainly with producers employ us fundamentally. I mean, sometimes we work for ad agencies direct, or directors direct very occasionally, but fundamentally our business is working for production companies and producers, so that's the answer to that one. Directors, sometimes extremely closely, sometimes less so.
Yeah.
I mean, we do quite a lot of first-time work, or we do quite a lot of work where we don't have any contact with the directors at all. More commonly, we'll have a call or maybe a meeting, certainly a chat in advance of a job. But it tends to be that relationship happens more closely, or it's the sharp end of that is at a recall. So it may well be that the director doesn't come into play until later in the game. It's not because they're any less focused on it, it's because they're looking after the rest of the production at the same time. So casting is something that happens towards the end of it. So we can be useful for them in terms of looking after the beginning of that process.
It's also the case that advertising is such an international business that an awful lot of the directors, even if they're with a British production company, are based in South America, Australia, the States.
Right.
Yeah, so they're just not present in the country until later in the process. So very often it's a remote thing until they arrive, and there'll usually be an intense recall where you're spending time with them. But yeah, often it's that too.
The second part of your question, to what extent do we have an impact on who gets the job? I mean, fundamentally not at all, really. But at the same time, we do decide who gets to audition.
Yeah.
So it's that rather than who gets the job. I mean, we will have a strong opinion about it. Sometimes we'll choose to share that opinion with the producer and director. Sometimes not.
Sometimes we're asked. Sometimes we're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But ultimately, our duty is to the project as a whole, so it's not necessarily who we think is the best actor, it's who we think is the best fit, who we think will work best with that director. So there's all sorts of things that come into play, and sometimes we get listened to, but that's not the point. And it's not our job to make a big deal about who we think should get the role.
No, absolutely not. I mean, part of what we do, or part of the skill of what we do, is to judge when that information's appropriate or not, and kind of feeding in if it feels necessary or not. Yeah.
But sometimes we really push for people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's also it's good when you feel excited about someone, you really think they're right for something. I mean, there's nothing better than bringing someone in and having a director sat in the room and thinking, oh right, yeah, I feel like they're bang on for this, I hope they nail it. And then when they do, it's great, it's very satisfying.
I mean, I suppose as you mentioned, the point at which we really influence the process is early on, when we're deciding who comes in for it. And I guess it's worth saying a useful bit of information is that perhaps, when filtering actors or deciding who comes into a casting, you're probably ultimately looking at about 5% of people who are submitted for things are coming in for a casting. Probably something like that, not much more than it at all. So you are filtering to that extent. Yeah. And so obviously that's a selective process, and that really informs who ultimately is going to get it. But yeah.
It's very selective.
yeah, it is, yeah, totally.
And if you're obviously recording, 2 or 3 takes with each person that's coming in, do you submit all those tapes, or will you will pick one to send?
Not one
or two, yeah.
I mean, I sometimes say, usually not the first, usually the last one, sometimes the second one.
Yeah.
And we might change the order as well.
But
the first take's a rehearsal. It's like you were saying earlier, a lot of the time, and sometimes it can be a really good rehearsal, and sometimes it ends up being the best take.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why you should nail something first time, and in fact, it sets an unrealistic expectation to put that pressure on yourself, really.
I think it's also, it's worth remembering again as actors, and the reason that we do that is because when somebody has to look through quite a lot of casting footage, when they've got an awful lot of pulls on their time, they don't have the time to watch a performance grow over 3 takes. They will likely watch 1 take. And I think that we work on that general assumption that the first thing that you want a director to see is something that you feel is presentable and is good and is best representation of that performer.
It's a reflection on you guys.
Well, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we'll want, if we're showing a couple of takes, I'm always a little bit loath to just show 1. I mean, sometimes we'll be aware that 1 is all that gets watched, and if you know that's the case, then maybe there's a good practical reason to do that. I mean, I feel like I certainly wouldn't want to be just doing 1 take or 2, and I don't feel like that's quite right or fair on an actor most of the time, not always within our control. I think also there's an interest to watching that performance develop. It should get better, or at least get different, whilst someone's in the room, and we're working with them. So that's interesting, and it's good to see, even if you're just showing 2 somewhat contrasting takes, or even 2 takes that are really consistent. There's a point to be proven there.
Yeah. Range is something that often comes out of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things that I see as a kind of from a producer's point of view is, and in commercials, the sheer amount of people involved
Yes.
in them.
Yes.
I mean, you know, it's not just the producer, director, production company, it's the agency and the client that play a massive part. Sometimes, you know, it's the client who has a say over everything.
Well, they have approval always.
Oh, well, they
pretty
do,
much,
because
yeah.
they're paying for it. Yeah, absolutely.
This is a good thing that we often talk about in terms of how the commercial process differs from other dramatic processes, and that is it's about those levels of approval. So ultimately, you talked about how much we have influence over the decision making. Our relationship is at first with the production company and largely with the director, but ultimately there are tiers of kind of approval within that process. First is that production company, that director, they'll have their choices. They then present them to the advertising agency, who will have an opinion on those choices, and then collectively they will decide on who they're going to make final presentation of to the client, and that's the final level of approval. So all of those approvals have to be made before somebody gets the part. So ultimately we're quite distant from that final level by the time it happens. And it is also a good explanation as to why sometimes there's a gap between your last audition for that project as an actor and the point at which you actually get confirmed. And sometimes that can be a tedious, annoying amount of time, but ultimately you might be looking at somebody who is based in Japan, looking at that footage and signing off on that performance. And that can take days.
And it's also very, very rare that the person who has that final level of approval is ever going to be in the room with you as an actor.
Yes.
Sometimes you get it though, you come in and
Sometimes you do.
Yeah,
I mean, the other thing is there'll be some important people in the room who need to like you.
Often like the account manager or something like that.
But there'll be some more important people than them who are employing those people who still need to sign off on it. So I feel like that's a good reason to have an awareness of who's in the room and the need to, I mean, I don't like phrases like make a good impression really, but I mean, sometimes an actor might walk in and their focus will be more on charming everyone in the room than it is on a great performance, which is kind of fine, but ultimately you need to do both because you need to nail the performance. Ideally come over as someone who's going to be pleasant to deal with and work with and have around on set at the same time, but also know that none of that matters ultimately when what's left on camera, those final takes, those best takes, is showed to the client for approval. So it's just about not getting too carried away with any single element of that process, I think.
It's also worth remembering as an actor that the most charming thing is being somebody who really listens and who is ready to work and pays attention and is an easy part of the process. It's something that we've tried to do as much as we can as casting directors, is to be an easy part of the process for production, and I think that there's something that actors can do towards that as well. Just listening, being straightforward. Ultimately, those are the things that are going to get you the job, and your performance being informed by the things that people are saying to you. Like Tom said, I think there is often, and it comes from nerves, there's an instinct for actors to feel the need to charm the room and to be dazzling somehow in front of the people that are there. And
sometimes that probably works because you're representing the brand, right? So
to a degree it does,
there.
as long as that's coupled with listening and a good performance. You know, those things are fine if they're coming together, but ultimately someone who comes in the room seems focused and ready to do it and then gives the right kind of performances is going to be
and to take it back to where we started, we got 10 minutes to do all of that stuff, so if you can be excellent and charming in those 10 minutes, then great if you can do it, but it's a high bar to set yourself otherwise.
Yeah.
Every role we cast is a problem to solve, really. So that's often how we look at it, and that's a positive energy for an actor to take into it as well. That they can come in and they can solve that problem and be a great solution.
Over the past 6 years since you've established Hammond & Cox, what changes have you seen in the industry, particularly with the types and the amounts of work that's available? Because I think it has changed quite a bit.
Oh gosh, it's interesting. It's difficult for us to perhaps comment on the amount of work available, maybe because in the time that we've established our company, because there's been a certain amount of growth that's happened within our company, that's hard to then judge what comes from that and what comes from, you know, an uptake in the amount of work there is. What I would say is this, is that certainly since we both started working in casting, and the use of the internet as a tool for casting and the speed with which things can be done, how international the industry is changed dramatically. And it means that I think if you're an actor based in London, when you're fortunate to be, you know, in an English-speaking country and where there is, like I said, a perception that the actors here are great, which is true, you can be working and auditioning for things pretty much internationally from a base here in London. Obviously self-tapes, there's a lot more than that there used to be, and uploading things, and everything from pilot season to commercial projects all over the world cast here. We work for clients, the States, Asia, Africa,
I think it's speed and expectation, actually. I think the speed of a process from getting that first call or that first email to having the first casting
certainly
session.
with commercial work,
that's accelerated, I think, for the work that we do.
Has your process had to kind of evolve with that?
It's the same process, it just compresses. We just do it really, really quickly.
Yeah, really,
sometimes
really fast.
Same day.
I mean, it's worth saying that when we started, I think we both did this, everything was shot on mini DV, and anything that was for an international project. I mean, gosh, I remember packaging up mini DVs, putting them in an envelope and posting them to Germany. And thinking like, great, I hope that arrives, because that was it. And you're probably talking about a couple of days for it to get there and somebody to look at it, and then it was... And now, very often, somebody from anywhere in the world can call us this morning and ask for a casting to happen this afternoon, and we'll do it. It'll happen. And actors, to give them great credit, react, and it's possible because you can pull a casting together that quickly, and often actors will miraculously turn up a few hours after you've started on something. You think, my God, I can't. How are all these people here? It's amazing. So there is that, certainly. Yeah.
Have you seen the change to the usage fees? Because years back, you used to get a lot of money for commercials, didn't you?
Yeah.
And it almost feels like there's much more non-equity work coming out, and the usage fees seem to be going down and down. Or maybe they can, there's obviously ways of getting around that with non-speaking or not featured.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that there's probably a broad truth to that, but I think that probably stems from taking 30 years ago as a starting point, and that gives you a real arc on the graph. I'm not sure in the time that we've been doing it, it's been that noticeable or that dramatic. There's a really wide range, and ultimately it's very difficult when you start talking about fees, because actors will have different opinions, agents will have different opinions as well, and ultimately we present a job and an agent will or won't suggest on it, and there are degrees within that. But I don't know that it's necessarily the case that things are always done for less or always done cheaper.
It's worth saying, I think, also that people often talk about fees going down, and the fact that perhaps maybe if you go back to the 80s or 90s, you could make a living from commercials. The industry is a wildly different place to what it was then. I mean, nobody now
3 or 4 TV channels.
Yeah, and a commercial that might be viewed during Coronation Street by 20 million people, and that A, doesn't happen now, and B, the industry is so diffuse that a commercial goes online. It might be on social media. It might just be those. I mean, there's certainly an argument that the way in which commercials air on the internet ultimately needs to be pinned down, and the fees relating to that need to be refined and worked on. That is something that I know Equity are working on. It's not an easy process, but that's a longer term perhaps ambition for people. At the moment it's a little rudimentary how the internet is termed and the fee that relates to something being aired on the internet.
I rather suspect that overall there are more actors benefiting from there being more work.
Tons more work.
And I think that is probably, at worst, it's offering a balance. And I wonder if it's even a beneficial thing overall.
And it's worth saying, and this is how we talk about the industry for commercials here in London, or the marketplace for commercials here in London towards actors, is that it's a sliding scale. So you perhaps and your agent will discuss or decide upon what is your base level for being submitted on a project. And so it's a sort of self-organising marketplace, that the higher the fee, the sort of general more choice you have of actor on a project, and perhaps certain agents will only suggest on higher fees, some are happy to take a kind of mid-level fee, and some are happy to take a lower fee. And so often when we're looking at projects and we're talking to production companies or ad agencies about budgets, it'll be our advice will be based upon, well, you need a lot of choice here. You need to be able to look at a wide range of actors. We need a lot of choice to be able to definitely bring in good actors for this particular project, so you need to pay more money. And there's a certain sometimes, like you say, there'll be non-speaking roles, things like that, where they'll decide they want to pay a lower fee because they don't need as much choice as they might have done otherwise. So those decisions do get made, and the market is shaped around that at the moment, I think.
It's rare that we have, too direct an influence on that. We're not setting budgets, no. We're constantly advising on them, upwards or downwards. We'll try and get the best deal possible for people, certainly a fair one, but that's about presenting something that gets choice, that gets a good level of performer, and also services the budget of the people that we're working for at the same time.
Yeah, I think as an actor, if anyone has concerns about that type of thing, that's always a conversation to perhaps have with your agent about what level are we pitching it at, and how can we make sure that I'm not being put up for things that I feel uncomfortable with the fee or something like that, perhaps.
I don't know. I think you can be empowered about that kind of thing as well. No one should be forcing you to do a UK commercial if you don't want to be in a UK commercial, or in a McDonald's commercial if you don't want to. There are, or advertising cars or anything. There is. You can make some positive choices there.
And absolutely, and there is so much work that even any choices that you do make probably won't limit your options too much, because there's always other projects, and there's quite a lot out there. Yeah.
Casting is so crucial to the success of the production, and I just think it perhaps goes really unrecognised and underappreciated in the industry.
Are you saying we should have an award?
I think we should have awards, is what I know that there's.
Is this an award?
Have you got Australia?
It is shifting. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
It's interesting. Obviously, we're
Hey,
both...
the work's the reward.
No, I want a trophy. Well, we are both members of the CDG, and this is obviously a big topic within the CDG. There are the newly established Casting Directors Guild Awards, which are going to start next year. Frankly, it does feel like that, to be honest, that it is an underrepresented element of within the industry, award ceremonies. It's a collaborative effort often, obviously, but then so are most facets of the industry. Design and makeup and hair and costume and all of those things are collaborative ultimately. So I do think that's true. Funnily enough, we working in commercials, we work in one of the sort of smaller, or one of the kind of elements of the industry that does have an award. There are British Arrow Awards here in London, which are advertising awards which do award casting. So we have that, and there is a ceremony every year for that. But it would be great if there was a little more representation within other bodies for casting, because I think ultimately, it's a shame that it's not better represented or appreciated. I also think too that it's a silly thing, but it's not a silly thing, that the connection between casting directors and actors, and the profile of casting directors publicly is a slightly unusual place at the moment. It's a little bit odd. There's a general feeling, I think, or a kind of broader outside perception, that somehow casting is kind of this weird dark art, and there's not too much known about it. That's why things like this are great, because ultimately it's a very straightforward process, and it's a kind of very casting directors are here to kind of try to help actors and to try and connect the right actors to the right projects, and doing that as best they can. I think the more that people understand what casting directors do, and the more that people have a knowledge of that process, the more empowered actors can be ultimately, and the more it will help actors present themselves in a better way perhaps. And in a roundabout way, having awards or things that acknowledge the casting process is only going to help that ultimately, I think.
I feel pretty valued though. I don't know. I think we're all right.
But personal ambitions aside, for the greater good.
I think it's a sticking point for a lot of people, particularly in TV and film.
Yeah.
You see it, don't you, as well?
You do. Yeah. It definitely is. And it's talked about and acknowledged, and that is part of the reason for the CDG setting up an awards, just to perhaps, again, it's about publicity and about also people understanding casting and its value and what it and the function it serves within the industry. Yeah.
Because to the actor, you are gods. So
which is not true.
Yeah, we're not gods, which is useful. That's all.
I think that's
Can Can you talk me through the process that you go through when casting a project? I know it's probably quite big, but if you could just summarise it for me.
Okay, so in very simple terms, we're employed by a production company. We receive a brief from the production company that reflects the ideas and the ambitions of the director within a process who works for that production company, generally speaking, and also the advertising agency who writes the commercial beyond that, all of which are serving the overall brief that the client has set, which isn't something you're ever likely to encounter directly. So we'll take all of that information, which will be a written casting brief, might be a treatment, might be references. We'll put that into a casting breakdown.
Financial information.
Yeah, exactly,
Financial
all
deal.
of that too. So we summarise and gather all of that information. We put it out usually through a spotlight casting breakdown. We use other breakdown services too sometimes. And we invite suggestions from agents based on a financial deal and artist availability and that written brief. That will then receive suggestions. It's our job to filter those suggestions. There are always way too many of them. Everything's very oversubscribed. Loads, way more. I mean, do you talk about it in percentage terms?
Well, I'd say this, that you can probably assume that if the brief is fairly straightforward and broad, that for a single role you'd probably be at 1,000 actors or more. So I think ultimately, we're looking at bringing in 5% or less of those actors, because we'll aim to see 25 odd people per role.
So our job then becomes filtering out the people who are appropriate to bring into a casting session based on our experience, based on that brief, based on other work that they've done. So we'll then set that up. So that's part one of the process. Part two is being in the room to facilitate the auditions. So those are the two sides of what we do.
Yeah, and that filtering process is about, as we talked about earlier, our work, what we do is represented by the 25 actors, say, that we do send for the footage we send off for a casting. So when we are looking at those actors and deciding who's best for it, that's based upon the brief, that's based upon people we know will come in and do a good job. That we kind of, so there is an element of what you were saying earlier, of us familiarising ourselves with actors, getting to know actors, and then ultimately bringing them in for castings and knowing they're going to serve that part well. And we meet hundreds of actors every week, and that's another thing that commercials does well for us, because you're looking at that many actors with multiple projects going on all the time. We'll meet 200 actors a week generally, more sometimes. So,
which is actually really good, I think, and because we're not deciding the terms of that work, that financial deal, which will dictate which the people that we're meeting, the agents who are suggesting, the clients that we'll get to bring in for a casting. So it means that we meet people sort of throughout the industry from the top down, and that's exciting. I mean, it means that that's how we meet our actors. We do it practically in the audition room rather than going to the theatre much or doing general meetings, because we don't have time to do that very much. But we'll see a lot more people and we meet them in context. I often say I'd much rather meet someone in the context of auditioning them than sit down and have a chat with them. There's a limit to how far you can get with that, really. And it's great because it means that you're constantly meeting new people and, our knowledge base is evolving. That's really important. Within that, it's great to have really safe pairs of hands, people that we've met multiple times who we're really sure about and we know exactly what they can deliver. But it's really exciting to meet new and useful people as well. Like the phrase useful, which might, I think so. I mean, it's boring not to, and we are somewhat forced to as well by circumstance or by changing briefs. We'll cast people in their early 20s frequently, so that means that we'll always be meeting new grads, and it's exciting to meet people for the first time. I mean, there's a sort of, I don't know, there's something nice about casting someone in a commercial for the first time. That's a really good thing to do. I mean,
it's kind of fun when someone sort of emerges, don't they? And you think about the sort of actors that throughout that 6 years who suddenly, someone will kind of arrive and they sort of magically appear and you begin to start seeing them and they become, there is that thing that with commercials where actors will hit a moment where their look, their performance, their things, that they're so kind of switched on with it, and they'll go on a great run and they'll hit like several projects in a row, and that's really exciting to kind of be around and to see.
I also think there's a thing where because by and large commercials not really dealt with in any depth or to any great extent at drama school, there'll be people at drama school who have got no idea they're really good at commercial castings and have got no idea they're going to book a load of jobs and earn loads of money, and that'll be a really important part of their career. But they're out there, and it's sort of our job to find them. And they're probably not the best actor in the year, the person who'll sign with the best agent, the most obvious good casting for third-year shows. So that should be positive, really. I think it's a real untapped area of the industry that people will happen upon. And so that's why, to meet someone new or to see someone in a drama school showcase, or when you go and do meet a drama school year or something, you'll see faces out there who aren't, you're not going to play Romeo and Juliet, but are really useful from our point of view, and those are the ones that you remember. So it's this different thing for us in a way.
It's so right, it's weird that, I should imagine as, well, we were once young actors, but you don't necessarily consider commercials, particularly when you're coming out of drama school. That's not where your focus is, but ultimately, you may leave and then suddenly you're in a position where you're doing 2 or 3 commercial castings a week, and it becomes a big part of your life, and that is surprising, I think, and it is exciting.
And it doesn't mean that that's your career, no. But equally, better to be doing that than working in a shop for 6 days.
Not there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah,
totally, yeah.
And actually, there's most directors will do commercials.
Oh yes.
Yeah, there's that, totally, yeah.
100%. We work with people who work on and direct huge feature films all the time in commercial projects, and that's always exciting for us, and it's exciting for actors too. I do also think there's something that we get I don't know what other casting directors experience this is like, but we get an awful lot of cards and letters from people and sort of thanking us when they've booked projects, and I often think that A, that's lovely, but B, I think that partly that response comes to them because they feel as though, gosh, the financial burden of being somebody who is living in London and trying to make their way as an actor, if that's lifted for a little while by having booked a commercial that they've come in through us for, then I think that's a great feeling for us to know, because we're both young actors, to know that perhaps you can survive for 6 months or a year because you did that spot, and that's a lovely feeling.
I met someone who I hadn't seen for years in a casting last week. I said, I haven't seen you for ages, and he'd been away doing theatre, and then I asked him on camera about any other commercials, and it turns out that the commercial that we cast him in, which happened very early on for us, had been renewed for 3 years, and that had been seeing him through his theatre work.
Yes, yeah.
And all of that is really positive. We just had someone on that Lexus job it's being renewed for a 3rd year or something, and so the producer or the agency guy emailed us, and it's nice when that stuff happens. It's good.
How on earth do you remember all these actors? Do you keep a record, or is it just comes with the territory that you do remember faces?
We don't have to remember everyone's name. We have spotlights, so they're there in front of us with their face and their name, so that helps an awful lot. So I go on pictures rather than names.
Yeah, I do too, and
I'm good with faces.
I think sometimes it's you're right, and people are suggested to you, and you will always look through all of those suggestions, so you start to get to know people. Photos as much as anything. My photos are so vital, and then and sometimes it could take 2 or 3 castings to really get to know somebody and to kind of feel like you have a good handle on the type of actor they are. But as we say, we see so many actors every week, and we are constantly going through the same process over and over again, that it starts to kind of burn into your retina. You start to get used to people.
And some people are better for other things. Sometimes you kind of find someone's got a skill or something unexpected, or a particular kind of area or tone of performance that really clicks for them. You think, oh right, you can do that, like
good
an accent thing, or a sort of
a
heightened comedy thing, or a really small filmic performance, or something.
Yeah. Do you find it hard narrowing down that selection?
No, not really.
Yeah, absolutely not. So, no, it's often because you're striving to for the best you can possibly kind of go for in terms of, because the references are often, not always, but quite clear, and you have a good picture in your head of what you want to achieve with the group of actors that you want to bring in. That sometimes that's really easy. Sometimes actually the last 10% of it you're really fighting for and trying to pull in people from different places and requesting certain people and stuff like that.
Yeah, we do request quite a lot. You might be surprised. You might be surprised to hear that. But we do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
just know that actors can be right for that.
Yeah.
Completely,
and also because we do so much work that we see it's nice to look back on things that are sort of tonally similar or that have had a similar brief, and yeah, I mean that's another little aid memoir. It's not just looking at spotlight suggestions all the time.
Yeah, and you see people go through their changes as well. You see people who play as 30s develop into people who play parents, or 20s and into 30s, and you know those changes, and you know you have to keep up with those as you go along as well.
And sometimes you kind of there are people who you kind of park for stuff too, like who are too young to play dads, but you think give it 5 years, you'll be a great commercial dad.
Exactly.
Kind of
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
What's the best way for an actor to get on your radar?
But I think that it
depends on their circumstances, really.
Patience is the first thing. I think that it's worth saying this, and this will be typical of a lot of casting directors, that as an office, we probably receive 400 to 500 emails a day. So to email us is not necessarily going to be the most effective means of contacting us. Because it's easy to get lost in the tidal wave of emails that come every day.
Certainly not if you're sending a general introduction email. There's nothing wrong with that, you know, in the broadest terms, but it's difficult to. I wouldn't encourage anyone to send those kind of emails and expect a quick or positive response. I also would say don't assume that they've not been read or that they've been ignored, and particularly if it's specific. You know, I mean, if you save up those emails, so when you see something that you're perfect for a particular reason, an email to highlight or flag that can be useful. But again, you can't rely on it having a beneficial effect straight away. You can't guarantee that the phone's going to ring later that day for a casting.
Patience. Make sure that you are inviting us to projects. You know, I think that far too regularly we'll get emails from actors saying, "Here's what I've been doing in the last year." I think, great. I mean, invite us to some of that work. You know, rather than tell us that you've done it, let us know that it's happening and whether we can come. We try to, yeah. I mean, it's not always possible, but wherever we do, and we're certainly not selective about what we'll see. We also have unusually-ish. We have quite a big team. So across the office, a lot gets covered. So it's always worth inviting us. And I think the most important thing, ultimately, is to ensure that the work and characters that you're suggested for, that you are bang on brief for them. When we talk about there being 1,000 actors suggested for a particular role, and you said, is it hard to filter them down to make that selection? Actually, there's a large group of those actors who will not be right for it, who are the wrong age, the wrong type, the wrong, you know, all sorts of things that ultimately they sit just outside of the brief. And so there's a big group of them that you can sort of say, okay, not for this one straight away as you're filtering through. And as an actor, I think that we don't yet know you, and I think you have to market yourself in that way, that making sure that the stuff that you're being put up for, you are exactly right for, so that it is hard for us to ignore that suggestion, is going to ultimately bear fruit. It might not be immediate, but down the line, when you start to see a face and you think, actually, that person they are just right for this, and they'll start to enter into your thinking. There's the danger of being suggested for things that you're not right for, and for that happening on a repetitive basis, it's very, very easy to start to ignore those suggestions. And you know, and I think you want to be careful that because there is so much work, and you will ultimately be right for something on a regular basis, that you're being put forward for those things more than anything else.
Do you get CVs and reels through the post?
Sometimes, less than we used to.
Not reels so much. Yeah, CVs a lot. You know, some CVs, yeah, mostly on email.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's a useful way to spend your energy, really.
No.
I don't know. We can't speak for everyone or other offices, but I don't know how useful it is to send hard copy CVs to people, really.
No,
maybe
I'm not sure.
sometimes.
I think it's just, perhaps it's about targeting casting directors who maybe work in, I would say, smaller scale theatre, who don't receive such an overwhelming amount of correspondence, I suppose. Maybe
the thing for us is sort of, fortunately, and because of the nature of the work we do, it's all on the work. So there's not really any need to send general introductions to us, because, you know, if you give it a month, there'll be something that you see that you're right for, and then you can do it in context. Just going back to what we were saying earlier about meeting people in the context of an audition, I'd rather do that than, do a general meeting. That said, I think for drama school graduates, I mean, seeing showcases is really good for us. I mean, and it's a very economical way of us spending our time and covering lots of actors quickly. I mean, I felt we get an awful lot out of seeing a final year showcase. Shows a bit less, and obviously it covers less people. But to sit down for an hour and a half and see a drama school year is great. It's really useful, and we get less invites to that kind of stuff than you might imagine. Actually,
that's true. That's true. I think also for actors with us, we don't do them all the time, but certainly generally workshops are a good thing to engage with as well. Particularly, you know, that's a good way of meeting casting directors and kind of getting to know them a little bit and actually spending more time than you would do with them typically. I think that's a useful thing to do and a good exercise generally as well. Yeah.
This might sound like a simple question, but I think it's easy to assume we know. What are your expectations of an actor when they come in?
Specifically in the room?
Yeah.
I think it's listening based, don't you?
Yeah, it really is. I think that if you're an actor, and again we've both been through it, that your nerves can heighten your energy a little bit and make it harder to be calm and listen. And ultimately, if you can overcome that and just have a direct channel of communication and listen as carefully as possible and try to interpret what you're being told, then you'll be doing well. I think also not being afraid, and I talk about direct channel of information, to say if you don't understand something. I think if something's unclear, to say, I'm sorry, could you just explain that again, or I wasn't sure about what you were talking about there.
It's fine to do that.
It's 100% fine.
Yeah, there's just a degree of honest effort to it all as well. You know, everyone has good and bad days. That's as true of us as anyone else. So, you know, if you're coming in and the communication is good and clear and open, and you accept the experience for what it is, you're not going to get every job, but I think you can get something out of it.
The reason we say this, I suppose, and again, it comes with a massive dollop of understanding, is that I think a lot of actors come into the room and perform listening. You know, they'll come in and have a conversation, and but a lot of what they're doing is showing that they're listening without actually taking in the information. And I know that comes from nerves, because again we've been through that kind of thing of, okay, I'm focusing, I'm listening to you, but actually their mind is whirring at 100 miles an hour, and
that fight or flight kind of
and it's totally understandable. But I think if you can sort of master that and overcome it and learn to calm, listen, and exchange information, then you'll do well. I think that's what we hope to get from people ultimately.
So, again, and I always pull myself back from anything that sounds too tough, really. But I think there's possibly taking it seriously, and by it I mean the work broadly, of course, but commercial specifically. We take it really seriously, and try and make it fun too. But there's no sense in which we consider what we do inferior to drama or theatre, or, you know, and that we like it just as much, enjoy it just as much, take it just as seriously, and we'll try and give it exactly the same amount of importance and attention and care. So it is unfortunate when sometimes you feel like an actor's not reflecting that in the same way. I mean, it's not about pushing that idea, you know, or sort of, but it's exactly the same experience as if you were going in for a drama casting, and it's a bit disappointing when people evidently don't deal with it.
And you do yourself, you know, a disservice ultimately. No, it doesn't.
To get chosen from potentially 1,000 people and brought in, you've already gone so far. You've already made it into, you know, another category, and that's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's
really
another. I mean, something else that we often say is, you know, if you're getting penciled for jobs, it's often a question that comes up in workshops. You know, I'm being penciled for jobs, I'm not booking them. I mean, I think that comes back to an idea that you introduced about things that are within and outside of your control. So if you're getting called in for things, if you're getting recalled for things, if you're getting penciled for stuff, that's all things that you are doing right. You know, there's only positives to be drawn from that. If you are then not booking the job, well, then it's beyond your control, isn't it? Because there are so many people who need to like you, so many levels of approval, so many things that are outside of your control, that's not going to be about what you can do in the audition room. So you need to be kind to yourself. There's a limit to what you can do.
So much of what we'll talk about in terms of actors, when one of us has seen an actor and, you know, they're relatively new to us, the feedback we'll give to one another will mostly be in quite straightforward, sort of fairly prosaic terms, in terms of, yeah, they're really good, they're just kind of completely straightforward, and you know, and that's an endorsement, you know, in terms of, yeah, they'll do a fine job in the room. And that's kind of what we're hoping for as much as anything else, rather than it was a spectacular performance and they're incredible. It's more just about they're great to bring in.
The reasons why actors don't get jobs can really be silly things, and quite often it's nothing to do with your talent. What's your kind of
Well, quite often
view
it's
on
not
that?
anything to do with not just your talent, but I don't know. I mean, it's just outside of your control.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about, I know it's reflecting back other things we've said. In order to book that commercial, the director has to like your performance, the producer to an extent, certainly the advertising agency, the creatives there. There might be a few people within that body. There might be creatives and a creative director and the client as well. That's a lot of people. If somebody, for whatever reason, doesn't relate to your performance, might not even think it's bad, just might not do it for them, doesn't make them laugh, doesn't make them smile, you're not their kind of person for whatever reason, then there's a reason for not getting the job. That's nothing to do with you, really.
And that's considering a single person. The moment you introduce a couple, a pair, a family,
Exactly.
there's so many dynamics, so many
variables.
Yeah, totally. That it's so hard to judge what it's going to come down to, and ultimately it might just be this group work together. And I think as an actor, there's an instinct towards feeling like that's not a real thing or anything like that, but it is a huge thing. Group dynamics are fundamental to casting all the time, and very, very often it's the case that not necessarily the best performance will get the role, not necessarily the person you'd expect to get the role, based on the idea that the group just works with that person included in it. So it happens all the time.
You get surprised quite a bit.
All the time, yeah, we really do, yeah. And you can't help it. You root for certain people just based on what you thought they did in the room, and you think, oh great, that was brilliant. I hope they get it. And so often they don't, and it's someone else, or maybe they do occasionally. But it's you do get surprised often.
I mean, sometimes, not all that often to be honest, but sometimes an agent will ask for feedback or an actor will want feedback, and it's something that we rarely have time to do anything about, really, just because of the pace at which we work. But the positive feedback is coming back for another one, I would say, and there's almost always an opportunity to come back in, and there's more work, there's other jobs, there's more soon, there's all of that. All out of our control, of course, because that's driven by the work that comes to us. So we might feel like we're in a really strong place with casting funny people or people in their middle age or something, and then we end up casting older people or younger people. Yeah. So it's you might not see us for 6 months, but then you might see us 3 times in a week.
Last question for you. You obviously see so many actors. What do you think it is that makes a successful actor? Are there certain traits that is there someone who walks into the room and there's just something about them?
I think that this is true, that as an actor, and we talked about the size of the marketplace in here in London, and there are huge advantages to that, because again, it means the international community comes here to cast, which is tremendous. But there is an understanding that an actor can have of themselves about what makes them unique. And I think that learning what that is, discovering that about yourself, and ultimately kind of celebrating that and exploiting it is going to lead to work and more work and a fruitful career. We talked about earlier a bit about when actors kind of go on runs and suddenly book lots of jobs, and actors will be familiar with that. I think there's something quite sort of intangible about that. It's a combination of them coming to the right age. You talked about someone maturing to suddenly being like a great, playing a great dad or a young dad. Their age, their look, their style, suddenly they feel confident and they'll go on a run. And that's frustrating because it can't be engineered ultimately. But there are moments when people, all those things come together and people do have that success. I think that largely those things are outside of an actor's control. Preparing and working hard and doing it as best job they can are the things that they can do, they can control.
I tell you what though, I think if you could summarise that as people often look to be something other than what they are.
Yes.
And the thing that makes you interesting is you as an individual. It's a bit of personality or regionality or, again, without wishing to hit it too hard, sometimes the drama school process can be one of flattening people out, and it can take the edges off people.
Something that we went through.
And ultimately the edges are kind of, it gives you something to hang on to a bit, and when it's the things that make you interesting as an individual that are probably more likely to get you work to start with, because it's something that makes you different.
It's worth.
But you can't fake that stuff.
No, but it is I think just looking at that and kind of thinking about it for yourself. I think sometimes actors don't necessarily want to engage with that because they want the idea that you can play all sorts of roles, which is, of course, ultimately will be true. But like Tom said at the beginning of your career, for commercial work, for music videos, short films, for smaller roles within drama. Ultimately, people will, because the marketplace is so big, want to cast actors who are the thing that they're going to portray. If it's a character from Manchester, I want to find a Mancunian actor because I can, ultimately, and that truth will be there. It's innate to start with. So if you're talking about bigger parts, then people are much more flexible with that kind of stuff. But when you're beginning, that's really where it's at. So it's about thinking about those things and embracing them and celebrating them ultimately.
And making it obvious on your CV.
Yeah, making it obvious on your CV. Discoverable. Yeah, because it's really not that discoverable sometimes. So it's very important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Nice to meet you.
Lovely talking to
Thank you.
you.
Yeah, thank you.